Mr. White, I congratulate you on your successes.
I would like to thank you for making me feel so old. No, seriously, I am humbled to accept this award. And one of my dear friends recently received an award, and he explained to me that awards are intended largely to inspire other people to do great things, to set an example, if you will. And I will seek to live up to that task. I would also like to thank all of you for attending this evening. This year, we celebrated the 800th anniversary of the signing of the Magna Carta. It's a vital document in the development of the common law, but we should not forget in our celebrations that it is essentially a protection from the king to a few of England's richest men. My nation's Declaration of Independence declared that all men are created equal, and presumably, therefore, that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. But the Constitution, which was adopted only 13 years later, clarified that the Declaration of Independence didn't really mean all men. It meant some men were only considered to be 3/5 of a man. And those who were 3/5 endowed were only so endowed if the designation benefited the men who were properly endowed. Women, I note, were apparently something else entirely. I did not, in the United States, grow up respecting the rule of law. I grew up respecting the lawyers who changed the law to make it more just. In my world, the law was fundamentally flawed. It always had been so in the United States of America. The law enforced a status quo that meant that too many otherwise law-abiding Americans could not eat or stay where they wished, buy and live on the land of their choosing that they could afford, educate their children in good public or private schools, love or marry other consenting adults, and attain or hold jobs for which they were qualified or even to vote. I'm not only speaking of African Americans, of course. These restrictions applied to women, to differently abled Americans, to lesbians, gays, bisexual Americans, Irish, Czech, Italian Americans, Asian Americans, American Indians, Latino Americans, Hispanic Americans, Jews, Quakers, Muslims, Baha'i, and Buddhists. And the list gets really long when you begin to look beyond my close family members. I grew up knowing that life was unfair. In my family, I was taught to respect the ramifications of violating the law, but I was never permitted to view the law or those who enforced it as legitimate. Today, in a few hours, the President of the United States will present the Presidential Medal of Freedom to Minoru Yasui. Minoru was a Japanese lawyer, or American lawyer of Japanese descent, who could not get a job in Oregon in the 1940s, so he hung up his own shingle. When the US began to clamp down on Japanese Americans during World War II, they imposed a curfew on all Japanese citizens. So Minoru took to the streets and began walking. He had his secretary call the police and the FBI and others to announce that there was a Japanese man walking the streets breaking the curfew. When they didn't arrest him, he finally walked into a police station and turned himself in. There they did arrest him. The case went to the US Supreme Court in 1943, and he lost. Ultimately, he was sent to prison and later to an internment camp. In 1986, shortly before his death, he convinced a trial court to vacate his arrest. Martin Luther King said that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. When I began the practice of law, there were actually people in the law firm that I joined who questioned whether it was even appropriate for a corporate law firm, a 132-year-old corporate law firm, to hire a black lawyer. The petty indignities that you survive in your practices on a day-to-day basis are called microaggressions. The term was coined by Dr. Chester Pierce, believed to be the first black psychiatrist in America. He spoke about the burdens, the extra scrutiny, the additional stress that went along with being a black professional. He suggested that this is an enormously complex job, and it takes immense psychic energy to be black, and how draining it is electing which of the many daily microaggressions one is going to respond to. The mere vigilance process consumes tremendous psychic energy. Each of you deal with these issues on a daily basis. My best suggestion is to gain strength from one another. Your presence here is testimony that you are not alone. Triangulation of experience, in my experience, is crucial to your survival. The future has never been brighter for lawyers of color. Now, I want you to take all of the things that were discussed earlier about the extraordinary changes in the profession and turn them into opportunities. I can tell you, I started practice in the 1980s. We still use something that many of you have never seen called a typewriter. This was before we had computers. We did have the first LexisNexis terminals. They were funny little red things that sat on top of, they only had them in the library. And it was really expensive to have one in each law firm. My point is that the practice of law has changed more in the 35 years that I have practiced than it probably had changed for 1,000 years before that. And I sat on the board of a college, which is a fairly progressive college in the United States called Hampshire College. And they did an analysis, which I'm sure that those of you with the Big Four can recite more accurately than I can, that explained that it took basically 150 years to build the railroads across America. And it took another 100 years to build the telephone lines across America. And then it took another 70 years for the cars to penetrate American society. And then it took basically 50 years for the television to penetrate America. It took 15 years for the for the computer to become a accepted and totally integrated item in America. And it now takes 24 hours to distribute an iPhone across the entire world. My point is, the world is changing, and it is changing faster, and the profession will change, and it has no choice, or you have no choice but to change with it. Learn to utilize the technology. That gives advantages to you as individual practitioners that large firms used to have exclusively. I can do more work sitting with my computer in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, than people used to be able to do sitting in New York on Wall Street only 20 years ago. I'm more connected to the world than they were then. This creates opportunities. The emerging and frontier markets are rising, and they are now vital to the Western economies. Take control of the world that you understand and provide leadership for the people, the justice system, and the profession. Do not limit your vision. Challenge authority when it is misguided, and utilize your differing perspectives to craft creative new approaches to the practice of justice or to the practice of law and the delivery of justice. At the same time that we are realizing a modicum of success and progress, we face a variety of frightening circumstances. The reemergence of fascism and xenophobia in Europe and the United States. We actually have a majority of the Republican Party candidates for President of the United States calling for a repeal of the 14th Amendment, which provides that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. It also provides for equal protection for all citizens under the law. Many of these challenges are simply new spins on old issues. But whenever and however they arise, our profession and the lawyers of color in particular must deal with them. Who else has the objectivity and the expertise to do so? Justice is a slow process, but reestablishing the basic tenets of human dignity is my principal justification for practicing law. Like most of you, I advocate for clients in accordance with their needs. However, I dedicate my life's efforts to achieve justice. Should we as lawyers continue to pursue justice as a profession? And should we continue to choose and believe that everyone is entitled to equality of the law? We will continue to make progress toward those goals. Should we not, as lawyers of color, demand justice for all and foolishly seek protection only for those who can afford the law and the representation, then what we currently consider to be fundamental rights and privileges will be retained by the few at the expense of the many. I would like to thank my colleagues from McGuire Woods for their support and their patience. And I would like to thank all of you in the room for providing me with inspiration. I really look forward to witnessing your achievements as a result of your enormous talent. Thank you again for this award.